Hi everyone, welcome to Consulting Recruitment. How do I get my foot in the door? This will essentially be a video, or I guess presentation, about getting that initial interview. How do you really stand out if there's thousands of people applying that are essentially just copy-pasted versions of you? So that's what this is going to be all about. It's not necessarily going to be about getting that interview and how to pass the interview. That will be later sessions. This will just be about your application process, how you should be going about applying to consulting firms, and what you can be doing to stand out really, whether you're from a target university or from a non-target university. Go into consulting recruitment, I wanted to recap our presentation last week, which was essentially why should you be interested in a career in consulting? Now we broke this down into three pillars. The first one being learning and development. There's a saying that goes 1 year of experience in consulting is 2 years of experience in industry. And maybe that's because of the hours that consultants work, usually more than 60 hours a week. But at the same time, you're working in so many different industries on so many different projects. Let's say if you're just an accountant, for example, for a company, let's say a media company, you're just an accountant for a media company, and that's the experience you're gaining. Whereas in consulting, you're working in financial services, you're working in communications, media, telecom, you're working in technology, you're working across so many different industries for so many different companies. It's really experience that you can't get anywhere else. The second point was salary and performance pay. Out of undergrad, consulting salaries are very competitive compared to other fields. I guess the only one that really beats it out of undergrad would be investment banking, but you really have to be interested in investment banking if you want to go that route. Third one is exit opportunities. Because of all the experience you're gaining through that learning and development, different industries, your experience is relevant to almost every single industry you want to apply to almost every company. If you view a lot of the Fortune 500 companies, even Fortune 100 companies, a lot of their posting for their sales, strategy, management type roles, analyst type roles, all of them look for experience either in consulting, investment banking, or that specific industry. So it really just shows you how big, how much consulting is put up there for employers, how much they actually value that. So it's really a great career path. And if you're looking to get into consulting, look into our previous presentation on why you should possibly consider it. So to go over our agenda real quickly, first we'll be looking at what firms look for in a candidate. Second, how to create your own recruitment strategy. And third, the consulting recruitment process, which is just looking at the different stages in the interview process that you'll be going through if you do happen to land an interview. So to kick things off, what firms look for? We split this up into different categories and kind of the loose requirements and what consulting firms are actually looking for when it comes to their candidates. We put stars beside the most important ones, or the ones we feel are most important, especially out of undergrad, which is your school, GPA, work experience, and your extracurriculars. Now, for the school, usually if you come from a top 15 institution, a school with a lot of reputation and a lot of alumni in consulting, it's a lot easier for you to gain or to gain that initial interview. But that being said, it is a loose requirement. If you do come from a non-target, like I did myself, there's still definitely an opportunity to land that initial interview. Second is your GPA. It is important to have a good GPA, strong GPA. It doesn't have to be incredible, 3.9 out of 4.0, but 3.5 higher is the general requirement that I've kind of seen and that a lot of websites also say that you should have. Now, there is more focus on quantitative majors. I'll say that. So if you are an engineer, for example, a 3.5 in engineering would probably be better than a 3.7 in something like psychology or business. Test is another, I guess, another category that you could look at. If you do have a GMAT while you're applying to consulting, it kind of gives you a little boost, kind of gives you a little bit more credibility that you're ready for a future in consulting, you're ready for an MBA, and that's something a firm might be looking for. Fourth is your major. Doesn't really matter what your major is at the end of the day. I've met a lot of people in consulting that, have come from biology backgrounds to engineering to business to accounting, so many different backgrounds. But at the end of the day, preference is given to quantitative majors. A lot of consultants you'll find do come from quantitative majors, so keep that in mind when you're applying. Next, there's work experience. So work experience, it doesn't really matter, but preference is given to kind of Fortune 500 companies. as well as high impact roles. So what I mean by high impact roles is roles where you're able to actually make a considerable impact for the business. So if you're, for example, like I used to be a merchandiser for Shoppers Drug Mart. As a merchandiser for Shoppers Drug Mart, how much impact can you actually have on the company? The most impact you'll ever have is keeping all the shelves stocked to make sure that inventory is going to the customers and essentially they can grab it, take it to the front. That's really your impact. So if you find you're really hitting the peak at your job, you're doing everything you can, look for a new role that really challenges you and you're able to really express how you can have an impact for this business or organization. Startups are a great choice in that regard. The sixth one, is extracurriculars, leadership, contributions to club, nonprofits, and preference is usually given to high impact roles again. So really, it doesn't matter, what your role is within that club or nonprofit, but again, the high impact roles, that's really important again. If you're president of a club, you're definitely going to have more of an impact than if you were, say, a communications associate sending out emails to different students at the university. So really try to get those high impact roles, try to join the bigger nonprofits. You'll definitely have more of an impact there. Finally, we come to interests and others. There's definitely some clubs, some consulting clubs at different universities that do pro bono consulting. So if you do join those consulting clubs, try to see if they do pro bono consulting, and if not, maybe see if you can get it started. Second, really big one is case competitions. Definitely a great thing to put on your resume, especially if you go to a case competition that has a lot of reputation behind it, and that's sponsored by a consulting company or consulting firm. And there's definitely a lot of other things, interests and other, but we won't be going into them today. So we looked at what firms look for, and keep in mind that those were loose requirements, so even if you don't meet all those requirements, you still have a chance to get into consulting. It's just loose, really. It comes down to your personal character and who you are. So next up is your recruitment strategy, which is essentially how you should be going about the recruitment process, how you should be going about getting that initial interview. So the first thing you want to do is create a list of firms. Next, you want to prioritize the firms. Third, you want to create your story in consulting. And fourth, you really want to network because that's really important in terms of getting that initial interview. So creating a list of firms is really important because it kind of gives you the big picture view of all the consulting firms and what areas kind of you want to be getting into. So this is kind of just an example list. It's definitely not big. There's a lot more consulting firms than this. I'm missing some big ones for sure, but this is just an example again, just for the purpose of this presentation. So the next thing you want to do is prioritize the firms. Now what that essentially means is prioritizing by different factors and the firms that you'll really be focusing your recruitment time on. Now, when you're applying to different companies, it does take a lot of time. You have to research the firm, you have to know what they do, you have to meet with a lot of people within the firm. There's a lot of time you have to invest into trying to get that initial interview to the firm. So that's why it's really important to prioritize, make sure that the firms you want to work at are on your prioritized list. But that's not to say you shouldn't be applying to the other firms as well. Out of your whole list, you should definitely be sending applications to each one. But for the prioritized list, those are the firms you'll really be going after. You'll be creating your story for, and you'll be networking with, trying to get into those firms. So you have to consider a lot of factors when applying to different firms or prioritizing your different firms. And this is just a really small list of different factors that you can consider. Something like culture is really important. What's the firm like? What are the people like, right? Something like the type of work that they do. If you're interested in technology consulting, BCG might not be for you, Bain might not be for you. Those are things you want to consider as well. Exit opportunities are really important. You want to look at the different alumni that come from these firms, where they go, what industry they work in, what kind of roles they get, and firm specialization as well. What's the firm's background? What do they specialize in? Someone like Oliver Wyman, for example, specialized in financial services. And if you're interested in that, that's definitely a firm you'd want to consider. So these are just different factors that you might want to use. There's definitely a lot more. It's not an exhaustive list. So for the purpose of this example, I've chosen some firms for myself. Now I come from a non-target university, so I know I'm probably not going to get an interview for MBB. So I've only chosen one of them, and the one I've chosen was BCG. And the only reason for that is because I met with some people from BCG, I networked, I really liked the culture of the firm from what I learned speaking to different analysts and different associates. So I really liked the culture of the firm. That's the MBB I'd kind of want to apply to, even though I know I probably won't get an interview at those firms. Now, I kind of started looking at the Big Four, and I said, who out of the Big Four what firm can I apply to? Well, I know Deloitte and PwC in Canada hires the most consultants, so I know I probably have the best chance there. So that was kind of my factor of consideration for those. I also know that they do technology, they do management, and I believe they also do strategy, Deloitte through Monitor and S&O. So I knew that no matter what, if I applied to these two firms, there's some role for me, whether I want to do strategy, whether I want to do management, or whether I want to do technology. Now, Accenture is also a big firm in Canada. They do management consulting, technology consulting, and they also have Accenture Strategy now. So I know that that's a big firm. They hire a lot. There's a big chance of me possibly getting an interview, or at least more than some of the other smaller firms. Oliver Wyman, I'm interested in financial services. I know they do financial services consulting in the strategy kind of management area. So that's why I want to apply to Oliver Wyman. So that's kind of just an example. It's very, very short. It's not comprehensive whatsoever, but it's kind of how you should be phrasing, how you should be thinking about applying to these different firms and how you should be kind of prioritizing them. So you have your list of firms, you've prioritized your firms. The next thing you want to do is you want to create your story. And what that essentially is why consulting? What appeals to you about this firm? What appeals to you about Deloitte? What are your major successes in your life? How have you made an impact? Where have you made an impact? What skills do you have that are transferable to these consulting roles? How have you prepared for a career in consulting? And ultimately, why are you awesome? Because at the end of the day, you're applying with thousands of applicants. You're competing with them. They're probably the same as you. They've joined clubs. They've done consulting, pro bono consulting. They've done Fortune 500 internships. And they want to be a consultant just as much as you. So what makes you awesome? Why would I want to sit beside you working on a deck, working on a problem for 60 hours a week, 70 hours a week, right? So that's really what your story is all about. And the reason why you want to create your story is because it gives you a big picture view of what you're all about. And the more you practice your story, the more you write down your story, the more you realize, hey, these are my strong suits. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm all about. And you're able to communicate that a lot better in your not only your application, but when you're networking as well. So it's really important to create your story. Make sure to write down everything. Make sure to read it to yourself to say, does this make sense? Is this me? And make sure to know your story. Next, you want to create your resume, your cover letter. You want to case mock with different people that you know, essentially practice case interviews. And you want to also interview prep. Now, these four things, you're going to have to do yourself. You're going to have to build yourself. There's a lot of templates you can find online, but at the end of the day, make sure that they're consistent. Make sure your resume is really showing how you've made an impact. I would recommend keeping it at one page. Your cover letter has to also talk about how you've made an impact at an organization or in this certain role or a time that you made an impact in one specific activity that you did. You really have to create these before you apply in that September recruiting season. It's really important that you have a really good resume, cover letter, that you've mocked a lot of cases. Depending on your background, if you're a business background, you might want to mock around 20 to 30. If you're an arts background, you're going to want to mock more than that, maybe over 50 cases. Just really depends on how comfortable are you with case interviews, how comfortable are you with solving your case problem. And last but not least, you want to interview prep. Now, behavioral interviews, they're pretty straightforward. If you've done an internship before in consulting or with a Fortune 500 company, you've probably done a behavioral interview before. They're very simple. There's a lot of questions you can find online that you can practice, and I recommend looking up the STAR method. Now, STAR. Make sure to look that up online. Really great method to use when you're going through behavioral interviews. Now, the reason you want to create your story is because your story is going to really relate to a lot of these things. So, for example, if you're applying to Deloitte, what appeals to you about Deloitte? That's really the first line, or I guess the first paragraph in your cover letter is talking about what makes that firm special and why do you want to apply to that firm? Well, for example, Deloitte was one of the only firms to keep their consulting wing after Arthur Andersen. Every other Big Four firm dropped their consulting firm. That shows that they have strong leadership, that they have a good direction going forward, and that's why they're going to be the number one consulting firm in the future. Really, it just shows that you know something about the firm, and the firm really appreciates that. The recruitment really appreciates that. They see that, hey, this person has actually done research about what we do, who we really are, what we're about. So it really gives you an advantage when it comes to other applicants who really just use copy-paste cover letters and resumes for each firm. Last, but certainly not least, is network. Networking is so important, especially if you come from a non-target university. It's something that you definitely want to do for every single firm that you've prioritized. Now, obviously, you don't have the time to network with everyone, and that's why it's really important to prioritize your list, like we said before, and focus your networking on these firms, because these are the firms you wanted to join, you aligned yourself with, these are the people you want to meet and talk to. Now, I'm not going to be going over what networking is. If you don't know what networking is, you probably need to start learning what networking is. Go to some sessions. I'm sure your school hosts some sessions about what is networking, how to do networking. Just know that what's important is finding an in to these firms. Now, there's a lot of different ins you can find. First is friends. Do you have any friends that work at these firms? Do you have any friends that work at these firms? Your second is school career center. Maybe they have connections, especially if you come from a big university like, I don't know, let's say University of Toronto, Rotman. They will definitely be able to help you locate some people at these firms. Alumni network is really important. On LinkedIn, every university has an alumni group that you can join if you're at that university. And you can really sort by, who works at this firm, who works at this firm, who works at this firm. Give them a cold call. That's what's next, really, is through LinkedIn, give them a cold call, say, hey, I go to this university. I'm really interested in what you do, about your firm. I was hoping that we can meet for a 30-minute or 20-minute, 15-minute coffee chat. So cold calls, they won't always be successful, but again, it's really just about meeting that person. But usually the people who do respond are your alumni, are your friends, friends, people that you've met before. When you're cold calling, don't necessarily think that you're going to get a response, but at the end of the day, it really doesn't hurt to send a cold call message and say, hey, let's meet 15 minutes. I'd love 15 minutes of your time to just chat about your firm, chat about what you do. Next is recruitment. If you're really not getting anyone on hook, no one to talk to, no one to meet for coffee with, no one's responding to you, recruitment's probably your next best bet. Just keep in mind that recruitment teams are very busy. They usually won't respond because at the end of the day, there's hundreds of students messaging them, asking, is there someone I can meet with? Is there an event going on? Stuff like that. So just keep in mind that you're not always going to get a response, and you got to be okay with that. Just stay resilient, message other people. If you don't get a response, maybe try back in 4 or 5 days, and then try another person. And finally, this is a really great method. This is one I used myself. If you're from a non-target or a target, go to different conferences and competitions that these firms sponsor. So for example, in my target list, I have BCG, Deloitte, Accenture, PwC, Oliver Wyman. Now I'm going to follow other university consulting clubs. I'm going to follow big consulting nonprofits or different nonprofits, and I'm going to see, if they're hosting a conference, who's on that sponsorship list. Because if BCG is sponsoring that conference for $5,000, you bet your ass that there's going to be someone from BCG there, whether it's just associates, analysts. I'm sure there'll be a recruitment team. So be sure to really look at these different case competitions and these conferences. Look at who's sponsoring them. And if a firm that you're prioritizing is sponsoring that conference or competition, 9 times out of 10, there's going to be people from that firm at that conference or competition. So it's a great way to get there and show your face and show them what you're all about, especially in a case competition. Next, we come to the recruitment process. Now, this is different for every single firm, and it changes year to year because at the end of the day, these firms want to stay competitive. They want to change around their recruitment methods to make sure they're getting students to apply and students that are interested. But this is kind of the general process of how recruitment will work. Applications are usually due in September for full-time and internships. There are some that open up in January, but you don't want to miss that September deadline because then you're just going to be relying on stuff to open in January, which might be tough. So keep in mind, September, you have to have your resume, cover letter ready. You better have mocked some cases. You better have practiced behavioral interviews, and you better have networked over the summer. It's really important. First round interview comes up. You get an interview. Congratulations. That's probably one of the hardest parts. You've practiced. You're ready for this. you have your behavioral interview in person or on the phone. It really depends on the firm. You pass that, you move on to the second round, you have another behavioral interview, and you have a case interview in the office. Third round, if you pass that, you usually get a second shot at the case interview, so if you do end up messing it up, don't worry too much about it. You have another shot to really show yourself, to show that, hey, you know what, last week when I did that first case interview, that was a fluke. Here's my second try, I'm going to nail it this time, bam, you got it. And not only that, but you have a partner interview. Now, the partner interview is really the last step in the recruitment process. It's just for the partner to get to know you. It's very informal in most cases. It's just a one-on-one chat. Not too much behavioral questions are asked. It's just really a discussion about yourself and the firm. And finally, that's when decisions are sent out, really. Offer or rejection is communicated. And this usually happens in that October area. So mid-October, usually some decisions. It really depends on the recruitment timeline for every single firm, which changes every year. But just keep in mind, this is what you should be preparing for. You should be preparing for 3 different behavioral interviews, moving up from associates or senior associates to managers to even the partner. And you should be preparing for 2 case interviews, one with associates, one with managers as well. That's it for the presentation today. Thank you so much for watching our video about consulting recruitment and how you can get your foot in the door, whether you're from a non-target or from a target university. Hopefully you found some of the information helpful. If not, please let us know why in the comments below. And don't forget to stay connected with our Facebook page. We post all our events, all the different info sessions we'll be having on campus that you can follow up on, come and learn more about consulting. Thanks again, and have a good one.